Welcome to the Internet of Things Made Simple. I'm Larry Bohumer. As I've mentioned many times, our actual first episode is coming up on November 1st. So this is our final preview episode, and I always figured, why not end with the best? I've decided to cover artificial intelligence. This topic is so big, it actually justifies doing two separate episodes, so this is only part one. AI kind of reminds me of what cryptocurrency did last year. And that's two different things. One, it's all anyone can talk about in the world of technology. And two, most people have no idea what they're talking about when they talked about cryptocurrency. And the same kind of goes for artificial intelligence. A lot of people will say things like, it's going to change how we work. But they really don't know how it's going to change how we work. They'll say things like, self-driving cars are safer, but they really have no idea why that is. So what I wanted to do was put together a bit of a course that covers 10 different mini topics. When you put them all together, it should give you a great understanding of what artificial intelligence is. This stuff gets really nerdy, so I'm going to try to use real-life examples as much as possible. When we come back, we're going to start on a quick glossary that covers some of the main terms you might hear, and then what some real-life explanations are for them. Back in a second. The last thing I wanted to do with this glossary was just list off some definition terms, because even though I was able to find some great definition terms, they make no sense to the average person. So what I'm going to do is explain the term based on how it would apply to a machine that makes hamburgers. So if you could imagine your local McDonald's or Wendy's or Five Guys, whichever one you want, imagine they were going to invest in a machine that can make all aspects of the hamburger, including making the patty, doing all the stuff with the vegetables, toasting the buns, making sure everything is done right, those kind of things. So I'm going to mention these terms, and then at the end of my explanation, I'm going to link it back to that machine making a hamburger. The first one is an acronym, ANN, which stands for Artificial Neural Network. And this is when software tries to mimic the actions of the human brain by classifying and segmenting information the way the human does, like being able to recognize an image. That might not have made a lot of sense to you, but this explanation might make more sense. It's how the machine would learn to mimic what a cook does when they learn things like where the dead spots are on a grill, or how a cook can spot the signs of bad beef. The second term is computer vision. And that's the area of AI that focuses on teaching machines how to observe what's around them, like object recognition and if something is moving. The real-life example here is, if you can imagine this machine, it's going to have to work possibly with other employees. So it'll have to have the sense of what's going on around it. It might also have to learn things like the signs of a grease fire. So it'll have to pay attention to certain hot spots, smoke, these kind of things. So the vision that the machine uses is very important. The third term is deep learning, and that's a method for machines to learn how to help create patterns that are used for more advanced decision making. This machine, you hope, actually does more than just flip burgers, if you want to use that term. You also hope it starts to learn the patterns of a restaurant, so it might know that perhaps I should have more patties ready for 12 o'clock noon as opposed to 10 in the morning. You might also want it to learn to take information from other sensors. So as an example, it might actually look outside and find the different demographics of people in the parking lot. And if it knows that a certain age of person or gender is more likely to order a hamburger, when it gets that information, it can make adjustments on the fly to make sure that it has the right amount of inventory. The next is embodied artificial intelligence. And that's basically a fancy way of saying a robot with AI inside. So that would refer to this actual machine itself. It's a machine that has artificial intelligence inside. Next is machine learning. And this is how the system takes data and learns to improve on a task. It may learn how to optimize the grill layout based on where to put burgers that have more or less fat, or where cheese melts best, things like that. Natural language processing is next, and this is how AI deals with our languages. Rather than telling it that a burger has to be cooked to 164.87 degrees, it might learn that if somebody says, "well done," that means to leave the patty on for 10 seconds extra. And extra pickles means that people want 2 more pickles on board. Reinforcement learning is how a machine mimics how a human learns. Most of us started out, whatever we learned to do, by being kind of bad at it as a novice. And through feedback, trial and error, we learn to do different things like drive, type, you name it. What you would do here is you would start the machine during quiet times with a human helping out and a human observing. And as the machine started to learn the processes more, you would engage it more in busier times and then eventually have it work on its own. Supervised learning is next, and this is teaching a machine to solve a task using human data. It's often done in things like weather forecasts and clearing spam from a mailbox. This might be how a machine might learn how to time different orders. So if it knows 2 different burgers are part of the same order, and one is well done and the other one is regular, it will learn things like put the well done one on first, and it will mimic how the human does through interaction. Transfer learning is reusing data from one task to help out another. So this might be things like using data from cooking one piece of food and learning how to consider things like texture in patty construction. So if it realizes that patties that are a little thicker didn't work very well on beef, it might take that information and see how we can use that for chicken. The last nerdy term I'll go over is unsupervised learning. And this is how the machine learns on its own. This might be things like how the machine learns what peak cycles are. It might learn the patterns that more people at lunch order extra cheese, so I better have more cheese ready. It's all things like that. Next, we're going to cover some of the risks of artificial intelligence and why many experts are saying we need to slow down its progress. When some of the smartest people that have ever walked on the planet give you advice saying, we probably should slow down and have more precautions when we roll out AI, I don't know about you, but I definitely want to listen. One such person is the late Stephen Hawking, who I have always had a huge amount of admiration for. He said, and I'll quote, "In the future, AI could develop a will of its own, a will that is in conflict with ours." He always believed that the greatest threat from AI was the fact that it didn't care about our social norms, and that machines taking over was a serious threat to us going in the future. Putting that aside for a sec, because that's obviously a lot more doom and gloom, there are some risks that are definitely more pressing today. One is lack of privacy. There's a lot of technology being done that involves lip reading, which is great because it obviously helps people who are hard of hearing. But there's a fear that this technology might be put into a lot of surveillance systems, and perhaps it could mean a lack of privacy. This is actually starting to come true because they're realizing that AI is up to 2 times more effective than even the best lip reader at actually determining what people say. The second one, I just wrote a blog post about it, so if you get a chance, go onto the webpage, theinternetofThingsMadeSimple.com, under blogs, and that's the advanced weapons that are being made with AI. I don't think anyone has an issue if AI is used to help protect and to enhance the safety of a soldier. What we're talking about here, though, is that weapons are actually being developed that don't even need a soldier to be engaged. Today, most of the AI is using drones, and there is somebody using the little joystick to actually control it. The fear from a lot of people is that if we develop machines or software that can act on its own, could we be looking at what Dr. Hawking said, in that these machines might not have the same kind of thinking that we do? So that's obviously a concern. The next is a term that I hear way too often, and that is fake news. AI is making it much easier to take people out and to add them into pictures. And while that can be great for certain applications, it does make you wonder, does it make it easier to make fake news? Can you just put pretty much anyone in a picture, and even the best people out there couldn't tell if it's fake or real? So that's obviously a concern. It's obvious to me that Silicon Valley is hearing these concerns because they're actually starting to get a conscience. They're asking questions like, why? Why are we doing this? How might it be used? What are some of the concerns to privacy, safety, inequality? What can we do to make sure that these technologies help everyone equally? In fact, what you're starting to see now is research papers that are actually being rejected if they don't take into account all the negative downside that might come from a technology. So that's definitely a positive change for me. After a few second break, we're going to talk about the impact that artificial intelligence, mostly on the positive side, is having towards our goal of looking after the elderly. Back in 5 seconds. Time for your favorite segment, Larry shamelessly plugging his book. In my book, The Internet of Things Made Simple, the largest chapter is dedicated to how IoT is changing the world of health. One of the big parts of that chapter is on the elderly, and that's how can we use IoT and IoT-enabled solutions to better improve the health and how we care for the elderly. Artificial intelligence is definitely one of the ways we're seeing that. AI is used in many ways, ranging from how it's helping people maintain their home, whether that's locking doors, turning off things that they're left on, turning off lights, reducing energy use, many things along those lines. It's also being used to help people be notified if their loved one has broken a pattern. So as an example, if the loved one is always down by 8 o'clock in the morning into the kitchen using the toaster, if, say, an hour later than normal, they're still not down yet, the machine can recognize that pattern and actually send a text message to a loved one. The loved one is able to send a note to perhaps find out they stayed up late watching TV, or they're able to take action, including heading over there or calling 911, whatever's required. The one area that's not talked about as much, though, with artificial intelligence is how it's improving the quality of life for many seniors, namely those living alone. Many seniors who have different health issues are also very lonely, and they want someone to keep them company. Enter in a product like ELLi-Q, which is ELLi hyphen Q as in quartz. This product involves a screen as well as a really funny looking little robot who's got a head kind of like Bart Simpson's, if I can best describe it. And the idea is that this device not only allows them to control different things and be safer, it also engages with them. It learns their name, it learns their likes, it learns different things about them, and it tries to act like a friend from what I can see. It also helps to keep them active, encouraging them to try activities. It makes for an easier way for them to look up information. During the trials, they showed a video on Bloomberg to which many people actually kind of sweetly said, I love you to this device because it was a friend that kept them company. I think we definitely are going to see this push more, not just for the elderly, but I think for a lot of people who have issues communicating with people. One of the great things about AI is that it can actually put on a different persona depending on who it's talking to. So if the person likes someone speaking loud or quiet, perhaps speaking a lot, more listening, the device can realize this pretty quickly and becomes the best friend. This same technology for AI is also being used when it comes to healthcare, and especially for the elderly. People have often said, well, I would never use a robotic doctor. They're just too impersonal. A comment like that implies that all doctors are overly personable, which is not what I've noticed over the years. And what I mean by that is that they believe that they simply have to give the information to the patient, and they often don't engage much with them. Whereas an AI-based doctor could actually recognize that the person maybe is looking for quick information, or maybe they want to have a much more detailed explanation with questions answered. This is kind of some ways that AI is going to help out with the elderly. Next, we're going to cover a totally different area, and that's how artificial intelligence is changing the world of writing. On a few previous podcasts, I actually have spoken very extensively about how we need to change how we educate our children. And that has to do with a number of things. One of them is the area of creativity, specifically writing. It used to be 15 years ago. It was pretty obvious if something was written by any kind of software. There wasn't a lot of interactivity, it was very descriptive, but it often didn't have any kind of flow like how a human would write. That is definitely not the case anymore. In fact, many of the things you see today, especially if you're big on social media, are probably written by some kind of a software program. They're now starting to also write some basic articles, like some of those in the Associated Press. Finally, they're also being used a lot to write biographies. There was a great episode of Inside Man with Morgan Spurlock where the software actually gathered all kinds of information about him on the internet and was able to write a pretty compelling biography. In addition to that, it's also helping to write the next great novel. No, I don't think War and Peace is likely to come out of a software package anytime soon, but what it's helping to do is, if a writer happens to have a block of some kind, it's actually able to do things like select words, or help with the flow, or even go as far as to finish their sentences. In a recent article in the New York Times, the gentleman was halfway through a sentence, turned it over to the software, and it actually wrote kind of an interesting finish to the sentence, to the point where he said, you know what, I wouldn't have written it that way, but it's actually probably better than anything I could write. It does this because it is able to take in more information than any human ever could. I don't care how much of a bookworm you are, there's only so many books you can read. These machines, on the other hand, can read pretty much every book and anything ever written. So it learns many unique ways to communicate that humans simply couldn't. It also helps by learning the style of the author. It takes into account, do you use long sentences? Do you tend to be very descriptive? What are some of the word tendencies that you have? It can do that and enhance your style or help you find a new one. One final area to this, which made me kind of chuckle a little bit, was that a program could actually be licensed by a famous author. So take Stephen King as an example. And you could put what you have written and then have the machine go over it. And it will use all the tendencies that Stephen King has to help, for instance, make your project sound a little more like him. Depending on what you're looking for, that might well be a great idea. So it is definitely changing how we write. And as I mentioned off the top of this segment, that means we have to change what we actually teach our kids in school. And I have a lot of that in previous podcasts, so I won't go over it again. This is the final segment for this episode. Part 2 is going to start right off the bat with who's winning the AI war. So what countries are investing the most right now in the world of AI? It's also going to investigate what jobs are most likely to be replaced by AI. Is AI a good investment from a stock standpoint? What are some of the leaders and insiders of AI saying? How can blockchain be used to make sure that the big companies don't dominate AI? And then finally, where does AI go from here? With 5 ways you're going to start seeing AI over the next few years. Thanks for listening. I'm Larry Bohumer. Full episodes start on November 1st. I do recommend you look at our new webpage, The Internet of Things, madesimple.com. And I humbly ask that you subscribe to our podcast on whatever service that you use. Be sure to listen to part 2 next week.